Imhotep Namaste Lakesh. Welcome to Tarot TV. Today we will be discussing the 13th major arcana card in the series entitled Tarot Cards, The Origins in Kemet and Egypt. Today we will be discussing the Metu deity Anpu in the Kemetic tongue, known today as Anubis in the Greek tongue. So Anubis was the god of the dead. He would help fairy souls into the afterlife. I'm going to get into his backstory. I'm going to show you guys his ancient papyri, the levels of the underworld, and what his functions are. So the death card always symbolizes a movement, metamorphosis, but literally it represents evolution into the next stage of your development. It doesn't always necessarily mean death. When people see it, they're like, oh my God. No, it is the power of transformation and metamorphosis itself. Those of you who have been following the series, check them out in the story highlights. It's going to be called Tarot and Kemet or Tarot and Egypt. For you newcomers, welcome. For those of you who have been watching, I appreciate it. Thank you so much for your love and support. So let's move on. Where are we now? We are in the underworld. We're in the afterlife, where the soul itself is venturing to the gates of Duat, or the gates of paradise, where your soul, known as the Ak, lives eternally. But first, it has to get through the trials of the 12 judges in the afterlife. Now, in the earlier part of the series, I discussed Osiris and his role in the afterlife. He serves as the ultimate king of the underworld, and his nephew Anpu, Anubis, would also serve his uncle in the afterlife because he really believed in his uncle more so than his own father, Set, the god of chaos, who we will discuss later on in the series. So Anpu, or Anubis, was the beloved son of the afterlife, who would also assist Jehuti, Thoth, in partaking his duties and responsibilities. So Anubis did a lot of stuff. He was part of the embalming process to preserve the dead bodies in ancient Egypt. He would literally measure your heart and your soul against the scales of Ma'at to see if your soul deemed worthy to even attain the afterlife. So how this worked was, first, the dead soul, the dead body, known as the Ak, the complete self, would come and be judged. Anubis would take Ma'at's feather and Shu's feather, which I discussed earlier, place it on one side of the scale, and your heart, or your Ab, was placed on the other side of the scale. If Ma'at's feather was heavier than your heart, then this being right here, known as the devourer, Sobek, would eat your heart, and you would not gain entry into the afterlife. So this was also testified under the 12 judges. This is why 12 tribes of Israel, 12 astrological signs, so on and so forth. You're going to see how the stories connect. I love bringing these connections together. So I'm going to move on to the next slide and explain the divisions of the soul, how your essence could live on eternally. The Egyptians were obsessed with the afterlife. They would remove the vital organs from the body, which would be stored in canopic jars. Those jars represented one of the four faces of Horus or Heru's sons, who would guard over fire, water, earth, and air. But the heart always remained in the mummies' bodies to be judged for the afterlife. And this was Anubis's sole purpose, to help bring the lost souls, much like Carrion, the Greek god who would ferry people into the afterlife in Greek mythology, or Hades himself. Hades would be more like Osiris in this case, though. Charion or Carrion would be Anubis in this case. So I'm going to move on to the next slide and show you the souls. The reason why the heart was so important was because it contained the 5 portions of your soul. The Kabbalists talk about this as well. It's interesting how this information got into Judeo-Christian teachings, but then the Christians kind of were like, nah, there's only one part of the soul, never mind. So let's go through them. The heart itself was a part of your identity. It had its light aspect and its shadow self. Your name was remembered through, name is something which follows you in every part of your existence, because what's in a name, right? It's a collection of your memories, things that people remember you by. Your deeds, your virtues, your character. This contains a vibration within itself, okay? Then you have your shadow self, which is your serpent consciousness. You have the Ba, the Ka, and the Ak. Your Ka is literally your aura, your influence, your shadow self too. It's known as your doppelganger. Your Ba is the spirit that moves between your body, your physical, and your spiritual body, your astral self. And the Ak is the higher self. It's the even higher version. In Kabbalah, this is known as your Ruh, your Neshama, your Yehidah. Interestingly enough, the word Merkaba is broken down in the ancient Kemetic tongue to mean Mer, vehicle, Ka, essence, Ba, soul, the vehicle of your soul's essence. Interesting how you could trace the root word back down to Kemet, Egypt. Moving on to the next slide. To conclude, the death card, number 13, those born under the influence of 13 are people who are always moving. They're go-getters. They're known as the underdog. You know, they're literally moving between the sun, which represents ego, and 3, which is Jupiter, is expansion. So they're always trying to expand and grow, which brings them circumstances which always requires them to move all the time. I don't know. They're also master builders. In Kabbalah, this would symbolize the archangel of death known as Azrael. But in Hebrew, Ezra means friend of God. And Anubis is a friend of the great god Osiris. Because look at all the responsibilities he has to do. Processes of life and death continue onwards as we are immortal beings. Everything is connected. Peace, love, and Imhotep. Tomorrow we will be discussing the 14th major arcana card. Stay tuned.